On March 10, 2026, a research team published the results of an archaeological survey at Buto, an ancient city buried in Egypt's northwestern Nile Delta. The headline discovery was not a golden tomb, a royal mummy, or a stone chamber sealed behind a decorated door. It was a pattern in the ground, a rectangular zone of unusually high electrical resistance, roughly 20 by 25 meters, beginning about 3 meters below the surface and continuing down towards 6 meters. Beneath it was another resistant layer that appeared to be deliberately laid. Sand. The anomaly had first been approached from much farther away. A Sentinel-1 radar image captured on May 5, 2018, showed an oval feature across part of the mound known as COM-C. The researchers used that large-scale signal to choose where to place electrical survey lines. They then created three-dimensional models of the buried layers and opened a carefully controlled 10 by 10 meter excavation trench. Mud brick walls appeared where the models predicted them. So did objects associated with religious practice, amulets of Egyptian deities, an offering basin, a relief of Hathor, a scarab bearing the name of Thutmose III, and other small finds. That sounds, at first, like the discovery of a temple. Some coverage has already described it that way. But the paper itself is more careful. The authors consider a secondary temple or shrine plausible. They also leave open a priestly residence, a religious service complex, an administrative building with cultic activity, or even a funerary structure. The building has been detected. Part of it has been excavated. Its exact purpose has not been established. Hold on to that distinction, because it is the key to the entire story. The mystery beneath Buto is not whether something exists. It does. The deeper question is what kind of place could accumulate so many protective and ceremonial objects, sit on a deliberately engineered foundation, and then disappear beneath later cities, river, mud, and nearly 3,000 years of rebuilding. A city the Delta learned to hide. Buto is easy to overlook on a modern map. It lies in Kafr el-Sheikh province, about 10 kilometers east of the Rosetta branch of the Nile and roughly 40 kilometers from the Mediterranean coast. Today the archaeological site is called Tel el-Fara'in, the Hill of the Pharaohs. It covers close to 1 square kilometer, and its principal mound rises as much as 20 meters above the surrounding fields. That height is not a natural hill in the ordinary sense. It is the accumulated result of human occupation. Houses were built, repaired, demolished, and replaced. Streets shifted. Workshops spread. Temples were renewed. Walls collapsed into mud. New residents leveled old ruins and built above them. Over thousands of years, a settlement became a mound, and the mound became an archive whose pages were stacked vertically. In the Nile Delta, however, the archive is especially difficult to read. Much of ancient Egypt's most familiar monumental landscape survives farther south, where stone architecture stands against desert ground. Buto, developed in an alluvial environment shaped by clay, silt, shallow groundwater, seasonal flooding, and branches of the Nile that moved, narrowed, or disappeared. Mud brick was practical and abundant, but when abandoned it could dissolve back into the same earth from which it was made. The remains visible near the surface at Buto mostly belong to later periods, particularly the Greco-Roman city. Earlier settlements lie below them, and some of the oldest levels are now beneath the water table. 1. Archaeologists have sometimes needed narrow trenches and pumping systems merely to reach deposits that would be easier to expose in a dry desert site. This helps explain why Buto can be both historically important and publicly unfamiliar. The city does not present one iconic monument. It presents layers. Pre-dynastic settlement, early royal administration, a long period of abandonment, a powerful late-period revival, Ptolemaic neighborhoods, Roman industry, and early Islamic occupation all occupy portions of the same mound. The structure detected beneath C belongs somewhere inside that vertical history. The scanning project was designed to solve a practical problem. How do you select a promising place to excavate when the target is buried beneath later remains, unstable soil, and several meters of archaeological debris? The answer was not to replace excavation with a machine. It was to use several kinds of evidence to reduce the amount of blind digging. Before Egypt became one kingdom, the oldest known settlement at Buto reaches back to the early 4th millennium BCE, more than 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid. At that time, the communities of the Nile Valley and Delta did not yet form the single centralized state later generations would recognize as ancient Egypt. Archaeologists use material culture, pottery, architecture, tools, production methods, and burial customs to reconstruct how regional societies interacted before political unification. At early Buto, the first material belongs largely to the Buto-Mahdi cultural tradition of Lower Egypt. As the 4th millennium progressed, objects and styles associated with the Naqada culture of Upper Egypt appeared in increasing numbers. The older view of Egyptian state formation sometimes imagined a sharp conquest in which the south imposed itself on the north. But the long sequence at Buto suggests something more gradual. Regional distinctions did not vanish in a single moment. They faded through contact, imitation, exchange, competition, and political consolidation. By the early dynastic period, around 3000 to 2800 BCE, excavated architecture at Buto changed from what researchers describe as an economic complex into something more palatial. Luxury production, administration, and the probable management of agricultural goods point to a city connected to wider networks and possibly used as a temporary royal residence. This matters because Buto was not simply a provincial settlement that became important after Egypt was unified. It appears inside the process by which unity was created. Its layers preserve a northern perspective on a transformation often told through southern sites, royal cemeteries, and later political traditions. Yet the newly detected structure is not from that earliest city. The geophysical evidence and excavated objects place it much later, mainly in the Sate period of the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, during the 26th dynasty. Between the early royal center and the later building lies a dramatic break in Buto's history. For roughly 15 centuries after the end of the Old Kingdom, archaeologists have found no clear settlement occupation across the main mounds. A city connected to the formation of the Egyptian state appears to have been largely abandoned. Then, in the early 1st millennium BCE, people returned and rebuilt on a major scale. The structure beneath C belongs to that return. To understand what it may have been, we first have to understand why the city mattered after its long silence. The city of the Cobra goddess. The Egyptian name later associated with Buto was Perwajet, commonly understood as the house or temple of Wadjet. Wadjet was the Cobra goddess linked to Lower Egypt, royal protection, and the authority of the king. In the form of the upright cobra on the royal brow, the uraeus, she was not a minor local figure. She became one of the most recognizable symbols of Egyptian kingship. Buto's sacred identity also reached Greek observers. In the 5th century BCE, Herodotus described an oracle and sanctuary at Buto and repeated an Egyptian story about a supposedly floating island called Chemis nearby. He said he did not see the island move, a revealing moment of skepticism inside his own account. His Description mixes travel observation, translation through Greek divine names, and stories told to him by others. It is valuable as evidence that Buto possessed a major sacred reputation in his time. It is not a precise archaeological plan of the city, and it cannot identify the structure now found at Calm Sea. That caution is important. When a religious building is found at a city famous for a goddess, it is tempting to connect every amulet and every wall directly to her main temple. But Buto contained domestic districts, workshops, storage areas, administrative spaces, cemeteries, secondary shrines, and buildings that changed purpose. The great enclosure associated with Wadjet is in a different part of the site. The new structure was detected in Calm Sea, one of the major occupation mounds. Still, the cultic objects found in the excavation are not random. A limestone amulet represented Wadjet. Other amulets showed Isis, Horus, Tauret, Bes, Anubis, a crouching lion, and a hybrid creature combining several divine forms. A faience plaque carried Hathor reliefs. A small offering basin suggests ritual action rather than mere decoration. Taken together, the assemblage points toward a place where religion was practiced, supported, stored, or administered. But religion in ancient Egypt was not confined to monumental temples. Protective amulets were worn by individuals. Priests lived and worked in houses. Administrative systems maintained cults. Funerary spaces contained personal objects. Workshops produced sacred goods. The strongest conclusion is therefore narrower than the most dramatic one. The structure had cultic associations. It probably belonged to Buto's late-period religious landscape. Whether it was itself a temple remains the question the next excavation seasons must answer. If you value documentaries that separate the discovery from the headline built around it, this is the point worth remembering. Archaeology becomes more interesting, not less, when uncertainty is preserved. 15 centuries of silence. Why did Buto disappear as a major settlement for so long? The leading explanation is environmental, although the evidence does not reduce the story to one catastrophic flood on one known date. Ancient settlements in the delta depended on moving water. A Nile branch could provide transport, irrigation, fish, silt, and access to wider exchange. The same river could also undermine a settlement if its channel shifted too close, flooded repeatedly, or moved too far away. Geoarchaeological work around Buto has reconstructed abandoned channels and changing patterns of settlement across the region. Researchers have suggested that parts of the city became vulnerable to flooding near the end of the Old Kingdom, contributing to the long occupation gap. The landscape did not stay fixed while the city was empty. Channels filled. New ones formed. Sediments accumulated. When settlers returned by the 8th century BCE, they were not simply reopening an intact, abandoned capital. They were occupying a changed mound inside a changed delta. By the 26th dynasty, beginning in the 7th century BCE, rulers based at Sais had reasserted Egyptian power after a period of foreign domination and political fragmentation. The era is often called the Sate Renaissance because it looked deliberately toward older Egyptian forms while also engaging a Mediterranean world of Greek traders, mercenaries, and competing empires. 3. Buto's revival fits this broader northern resurgence, but the archaeological story is local. Pottery of Sate date appears across the site. Excavation and borehole evidence indicate substantial late-period deposits, in some places several meters thick. The new structure seems to have been built during this phase of renewed occupation. Here the artificial sand layer becomes significant. The rectangular building appears to rest on deliberately placed sand at a depth of roughly 6 to 7 meters. In a soft, wet, layered mound, sand could help level and stabilize the ground beneath mud brick architecture. It suggests planning before walls were raised. But it does not automatically prove an enormous state project. The surveyed area is limited, the excavation trench exposed only part of the complex, and the paper's own conclusion describes the building as possibly religious or administrative. Sand foundations were a practical response to local ground conditions, not evidence of impossible engineering. The important point is more subtle. The people who resettled Buto understood that they were building on unstable history. They prepared the ground. The structure beneath calm sea may preserve not only a religious function, but a decision about how to reclaim a city that the delta had once made difficult to inhabit. How the ground became an image. The discovery began with a satellite, but the phrase satellite radar found a temple compresses several steps into one and gives the technology more certainty than it actually possesses. The team processed Sentinel-1 synthetic aperture radar data captured in May 2018. Radar does not produce an ordinary photograph of walls underground. It sends microwave energy toward the surface and measures the returning signal. Differences in moisture, roughness, soil composition, vegetation, and buried materials can alter that return. After processing, the researchers identified a broad oval anomaly about 128 by 62 meters. The signal helped them choose a smaller area for ground investigation. Next came electrical resistivity tomography, or ERT. Metal electrodes were arranged along parallel lines, and controlled electrical currents were passed through the ground. Different materials conduct electricity differently. Wet clay usually behaves differently from dry sand, stone, rubble, or compact mud brick. By measuring many combinations and processing them through inversion software, researchers created models of resistivity at different depths. A useful analogy is medical imaging, but it has limits. A CT scan can distinguish structures because the physics of the human body is relatively constrained and the equipment surrounds the patient with controlled measurements. Archaeological ERT is reading a far more irregular body, soil altered by water, roots, pits, collapsing walls, salt, later construction, and centuries of human disturbance. The model does not label a feature, temple. It displays contrasts that require archaeological interpretation. In Buto's upper 3 meters, the patterns were diffuse. The team interpreted them as displaced Ptolemaic or Roman mud brick, limestone fragments, and pottery. Deeper down, between about 3 and 6 meters, a cleaner rectangular anomaly emerged. Its dimensions were approximately 20 by 25 meters. Below it, a high resistivity zone was consistent with sand. The researchers then tested the model by excavation. They opened square C1, a 10 by 10 meter trench, divided into 4 smaller squares. Soil was removed stratigraphically in controlled increments. Walls appeared between roughly 3.1 and 4.1 meters below the surface, varying across the trench. Their location matched the predicted anomaly closely enough to validate the general interpretation. This is the real technological achievement. Not a magical picture of an intact building. A chain of narrowing probabilities: satellite signal, ground survey, 3-dimensional model, targeted trench, physical wall. 4. And every link matters. Radar alone could have been misleading. ERT alone could have confused materials. Excavation alone might have required much more time and money to find the same target. Together, the Methods turned a buried difference in soil into a testable archaeological claim. What the trench actually revealed. The excavation did not expose the entire 20 by 25 meter structure. It opened a window into it. That distinction controls what can safely be said about the building's plan. Within the trench, archaeologists documented mud brick masonry at different depths. Those variations may reflect separate construction phases, erosion, or later disturbance. The walls align with the rectangular resistivity pattern, but the full arrangement of rooms, entrances, courtyards, and surrounding boundaries remains underground. The small objects provide the strongest clue to activity. The assemblage included protective and divine imagery associated with several gods and goddesses. Wadjet connects directly to Buto's local sacred identity. Isis nursing Horus, Horus the child, Tauret, and Bes belong to traditions of protection, childbirth, family, and healing. Anubis carries funerary associations. The Hathor plaque and offering basin support ceremonial use. The hybrid amulet, combining the features of a baboon, falcon, and Patekos-like dwarf, suggests a complex protective object rather than a simple decorative token. One object deserves special caution. A steatite scarab bearing the name of Thutmose III, a ruler of the 18th dynasty who lived many centuries before the proposed Sate date of the structure. A royal name on an amulet does not necessarily date the building to that king's reign. Egyptian scarabs could be copied, reused, collected, inherited, or valued long after the ruler named on them had died. The scarab may reveal cultural memory or the long life of royal symbols rather than the construction date. The fragments of limestone figures in sexual positions may also attract disproportionate attention. Their meaning depends on context, comparison, and complete publication. They should not be used to turn the building into a sensational, fertility temple without supporting evidence. What do the finds prove? They show that the excavated area contained a concentration of religious and protective objects associated with a late-period context. They make a purely ordinary domestic interpretation less likely, though not impossible if the building belonged to priests or housed ritual services. They support the idea of a shrine or temple-related complex. What do they not prove? They do not identify the owner, name the institution, establish a dedication, reveal a burial, or show that the structure was the principal temple of Wadjet described in later traditions. That gap between evidence and identity is where the mystery remains legitimate. Temple, tomb, or something between. Archaeological buildings do not always fit the categories used in headlines. A temple sounds religious. A house sounds domestic. A tomb sounds funerary. In an ancient Egyptian city, those functions could overlap. Through institutions, personnel, storage, ritual, and reuse. Consider the temple hypothesis. The offering basin, deity amulets, cultic plaque, and concentration of sacred objects all fit a religious environment. The rectangular plan and substantial foundation could support a formal structure. But a temple would normally be identified more securely through architectural layout, inscriptions, altars, deposits placed during construction, or repeated evidence of organized ritual. Only a portion of the building has been excavated. 5. Now consider a priestly house or service complex. Priests did not only perform ceremonies. They managed supplies, records, offerings, workshops, personnel, and property. A building near a sacred precinct might contain devotional objects because of the people who worked there. This interpretation can explain a mixture of personal amulets and formal ritual material without requiring the structure to be a sanctuary. A funerary interpretation remains possible because several objects have protective or mortuary associations. And the authors mention a large tomb among the possibilities. Yet no securely described burial chamber. Human remains, or tomb owner has been reported from the exposed trench. Calling it a tomb now would move beyond the evidence. There is also the possibility of change over time. A building constructed for administration could later acquire a shrine. A residence could be repurposed for ritual. Objects could enter as fill when a wall was repaired or demolished. Some may have been lost by individuals rather than deliberately deposited. The strongest skeptical explanation is not that the entire anomaly is natural. Excavation has confirmed built mud brick walls. The skeptical challenge concerns function and scale. The religious objects may come from a limited activity area within a larger mixed-use complex. The broad radar anomaly may include more than one phase. The neat rectangle in the resistivity model may simplify architecture altered by later occupation. This is why future excavation matters more than a more dramatic scan. The next decisive evidence will probably be ordinary: a doorway, an inscribed fragment, a foundation deposit, a room arrangement, a burial cut, or a sequence showing how the building changed. A mystery does not require an impossible object. Sometimes it is a known wall waiting for the one context that tells us why it was built. The older city beneath the foundation. The structure beneath C is already deep, but it may not be the oldest feature in that location. The study identified a possible deeper layer associated with the late 8th century BCE beneath the Sate construction. That interpretation is preliminary, yet it raises a larger point about Buto: every successful discovery creates a new floor below it. The artificial sand foundation was not laid on empty geological ground. It was placed inside a mound created by previous activity and natural change. The Sate builders may have leveled earlier deposits, cut through them, covered them, or reused an area that had acquired religious meaning before their own building existed. Above the structure, later Ptolemaic and Roman inhabitants left debris and architecture that blurred the signal. Elsewhere at Buto, researchers have found residential districts, baths, storage spaces, metalworking, pottery kilns, and specialized Roman ceramic technology. The site remained economically active long after the Sate building lost its original function. Below it lies the city that had returned after a 15th century gap. Deeper still, in other parts of the mound, are the early dynastic and pre-dynastic settlements tied to the formation of the Egyptian state. The layers are not a single uninterrupted story. They are episodes separated by abandonment, environmental change, political revival, and urban transformation. This makes Buto a useful correction to the way ancient Egypt is often imagined. The civilization was not only a row of stone monuments surviving unchanged through time. Cities migrated within their own boundaries. Sacred centers expanded and contracted. River branches determined which settlements could thrive. Mud brick capitals could become almost invisible while the symbols associated with them survived on royal crowns for millennia. 6. The new project also demonstrates why delta archaeology may change as survey technology becomes more widely integrated with excavation. Many settlements remain beneath agricultural land, later towns, deep alluvium, or groundwater. Satellite radar and ERT will not solve them from a distance. But they can identify where the cost and difficulty of excavation are most justified. That may be the broader significance of the 2026 study. The mysterious structure is one result. The repeatable method is another. If the workflow can reliably distinguish occupation phases in Buto's difficult soil, it can guide investigations at other layered delta sites where traditional excavation faces the same limits. What the discovery changes, and what it does not. The building beneath Kam-Si does not rewrite all of Egyptian history. It does not reveal a lost civilization, an unknown technology, or a secret chamber protected by a modern institution. The researchers openly published the method, the dimensions, the excavation strategy, the possible interpretations, and the uncertainties. What it changes is our resolution. Buto's late-period revival is no longer represented only by scattered pottery and known monuments. A substantial mud brick structure, built on an artificial sand foundation and associated with numerous religious objects, can now be placed inside the resettled city. It shows that Kam-Si contained organized architecture during the Sate period and that religious activity extended beyond the most obvious temple zone. The discovery also weakens the assumption that a vanished building leaves no recoverable shape. Mud brick can dissolve, collapse, and become visually indistinguishable from surrounding soil, yet still alter electrical resistance enough to be mapped. A city hidden by the delta is not necessarily beyond investigation. It requires a different kind of visibility. But several questions remain open. Was the building a secondary temple, a shrine attached to a larger institution, a priestly residence, an administrative religious complex, or a funerary structure? Was the sand foundation unique to this building or part of wider leveling across Kam-Si? Does the deeper layer belong to the earliest phase of resettlement? Were the amulets deposited deliberately, stored for distribution, used by occupants, or mixed into the context during later disturbance?